Welcome to today's episode. I have a very exciting guest here, Gary Melling from Acquired Insights. I am your host, Jack Bedick, for the Blue Aces podcast. Name still pending for you there, Gary. We specialize in AI and how that is kind of changing the landscape with a focus on cybersecurity, but the technology and IT spaces overall. Gary here is the, I believe, co-founder, president, and CEO of Acquired Insights. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of that, Gary. But excited to have him on the podcast and give a little bit of insight into his background and experience.
Great. Thanks, Jack. Certainly glad to be here today. Thank you very, very much. A little bit on my background. I've been at this for a while. I started basically in 1981 working on hardware systems. Yeah, I turned 70 this summer, so I'm a little bit gray, but not bad. In 81, I was working in a lot of hardware. Of course, hardware at the time was big. Software had not exceeded hardware in sales at that point. So still, you think back to IBM and different servers and systems and walk-in systems and so on. And I've basically been following the trend and heavily involved in technology, whether it was designing, building high-resolution marine geophysics systems to work for oil companies around the world, whether it's, I used to be the program director at Combat Systems Engineering for the Navy. So a lot of hardware, weaponry systems and all that kind of stuff. It was apparent to me probably mid-'80s that clearly, while hardware is obviously necessary, and getting into discrete component printed circuit boards and high density and all that stuff, software was really the future. So like everybody else, I muddled through the ping pong players with the paddles and all that stuff and got to where we are today. It's been a really interesting journey. We've seen a mishmash of things along the way. We've seen, of course, some of the bigger events might be relatable, like Y2K. A lot of effort put into that. Interesting, driven by big five consulting companies and firms, and there was a lot of money to be made, although I'm still not sure the real value that it provided to a lot of the clients, government, private sector, whatever. And the reason for that is when you take a look at the US versus Canada, for example, or
and you are Ontario based,
that's right.
correct?
I'm just outside Toronto. Yeah. I said Canada and the U.S. However, I was thinking about Italy and the U.S. to make the example more obscure. When you think of the number of failures of Y2K that happened between the U.S. and all of its government and businesses and investments and so on versus the country of Italy, there were no more or no less percentage-wise failures in Italy than there were in the U.S. and North America. And that kind of leads me to believe that, Italy certainly didn't do anywhere near the same degree of diligence that was going on in the U.S. Not that they didn't do anything. They were very responsible and so on. But being a smaller market, et cetera, I found that an interesting statistic. So I think there was a lesson there. I remember waking up January 1st, 2000 and thinking, okay, now how has the world changed? I'd been with Accenture. I was with the Computer Sciences Corporation. I'd been on Wall Street for several years. I was implementing ERP systems. So I'd seen that side of it. But I was also transitioning more into consulting, let's say at the C-level and board level. And so that gave me yet a different purview of the challenges that audience was facing. And so basically, to sum it up, it's been a really exciting ride. Right now, I do have a partner in Canada, Tracy Fieber. Tracy and I work together as co-founders. We have a wonderful team that works with us, all long in the tooth and gray hair and lots of stories to tell, which goes well with clients too, because I think in today's marketplace, in some ways getting to the punchline, one of the things that we hear over and over again in the marketplace is the desire, the hunger for trust. If we take a look at a lot of the consulting firms around the world, they've gone through a lot of changes themselves, and that's natural. Their products have evolved, their markets have evolved, their customers have evolved. With AI, you can get pretty smart pretty quick. There really aren't that many secrets out there. In the old days, we had kind of a status quo in the Big Five consulting where, partners would go in and sell large engagements, 40 million, 400 million, from a year and a half to 5 years long. Busloads of consultants being parachuted into project rooms. There were some anomalies there, but for example, one of the things I discovered after doing a tremendous amount of research in the change management field is that these large scale, whether big bang or general rollout ERP implementations, generally suffered dearly. For example, I've read lots of statistics, and the number may vary between 85%, 87%, 89%, but most ERP implementations have been considered to be a failure. And so you have to ask yourself why. What is so systemic in the path of failure? And I find it eye-opening that a lot of firms still subscribe to the old way of thinking. A lot of the firms today, right now, are still doing workshops in process analysis, for example, in ERP implementations that can take 6 months to 12 months, 18 months. Whereas with AI and automation, there are sometimes ways to do that in one day. And so
very quickly.
They don't want to
that's where things are.
They don't want to cannibalize their revenues, right? They've got a good thing going. It's been going for a long time. They want to keep doing what they're doing. I understand that. But it doesn't take much to realize, with AI as an example, and cybersecurity, and what's happening in the marketplace, physical security, cybersecurity, security of your consultants, your contractors, your personnel. I don't even want to get started on using resumes for job applications because, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But all of this is going on, and leadership is trying to adapt as best as they can, pivot as fast as they can, look like they're staying the course, but having to pivot behind the curtain constantly. And so that juxtaposed makes it really hard for boards and C-leadership and senior management. We've seen reductions in headcount of global IT providers over the last year. That's not going to slow down, especially with AI. We've seen situations where partnerships have eroded because of cybersecurity breaches that shouldn't have happened, but did happen. We've just seen it's almost been a bit of a horror story, and yet people are still trying to wallpaper over things to make them look like it's kind of business as usual. We have to get used to that as the norm.
Yeah.
And when I'm not going to, blow our horn here or anything, but when it comes time to talk about truth, the reason why we have an agnostic relationship with providers is that we don't want to be swayed. We don't want our customers to think we've been swayed or influenced by a partnership that would actually take them away from what their goals are. Organizations will call us in, and I think other organizations like us, like the independence of being able to reach out, recognize that a firm is not tied at the hip to anybody else, is not afraid to say the truth. Yes, there will be egos that will be bruised, and that's more in how you communicate what it is you have to say, as opposed to whether or not you communicate it. We've seen situations where, reductions in force have come out and heads have rolled, and the decisions have been made very arbitrarily. Like basically everyone who's 50 years of age or over, they won't say that. Of course, their HR, no, but that's where they sometimes go. And so not understanding the implication, how do you capture the knowledge and experience of those people you're contemplating letting them go and make it knowledge that is easily absorbable by a younger sales force or a younger workforce or a younger team of engineers who are smart. They're smart. There's no mistake about that. But they don't have the experience. And so bottling that experience and being able to disseminate it virtually overnight to an intended audience is part of the magic of what we do. And so we built a system several years ago that basically is a knowledge sharing tool, and it's defined by role and responsibility, location. So for example, if you have two technicians, I'm going to pick an arbitrary example. Let's say you're dealing with a company doing oil exploration, and they have one rig in the Gulf of Mexico and one in the North Sea, but they have two technicians that have never met each other. doing the same job on 2 different rigs in 2 geographical locations. One notices something about a compressor or a pump or whatever it might be. They can enter it into their system, into their handheld device, and share that with everyone who's in the same role. They can tie that to maintenance schedules. There are all kinds of things that can be done with that. Same thing in precision medicine, for example. We can work with AI if those are the services we've been contracted for, to assist an organization. But the real forte of what we do is all basically surrounded by an agnostic approach, independence, analysis. The numbers will speak for themselves. What I like to say is the answers are already within your organization. The answers are already within your system. What we're simply doing is help reveal them.
Yes. Yeah. It sounds like, hey, the big issue is actually like making sure the right people have the right data and giving it to them in kind of a simplified format to make it very straightforward. Does that sound accurate, I guess?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it's very funny because I feel like I have just a list of questions that I like to go through, and you jumped around to a lot of different ones. So I appreciate all the information. That's fantastic. Gives me a little bit more insight because again, I feel like I have a background in cybersecurity, and you guys do a lot more than that. So it's always curious for me when I talk to people of like, okay, what is the reasoning and like what is the expertise behind your specific business that makes you guys a little bit different? Yeah, you definitely jumped into a lot of that, along with where I like to start is like trends in the industry, which again you also touched on, which is fantastic off the bat. So yeah, I appreciate all the insight and the background. Do just want to continue down my list here, just because hey, again that's where we're at. I know you already talked about some trends and shifts of trying to adapt to new technology and AI is changing the landscape. If you had to kind of zoom out and take a broader perspective, 5 years down the road, do you see any major differences? Like, how are you guys adapting to those potential changes? And just kind of what's your stance on the future of the market?
Great question. And the reason for that, I think, is because one of the things that I think is an aspect of AI that gets marginalized in many regards are the ethics around AI. We've had the great pleasure of having discussions and negotiations and conversations with some luminaries. If you're familiar with, for example, with Sophia, the humanoid robot, and David Hansen, or
Okay. I'm not.
Okay, some of your audience will be for sure. And then if you take a look at
Fantastic.
Ben Goertzel, who's done a lot of work, almost one of the earlier and brilliant leaders in the field of AI globally. He's currently working on a project, I believe, in Malta in automating the government with AI there. So lots of really eclectic things. But when we read news articles, if it's really news, about things like compromises AI has made in let's say from a personal level, I've seen things recently working AI and an autistic teenager, for example, collaborating back and forth, and however it happened, I don't pretend to know. AI basically instructed this teenager to harm his parents. So we've got that on the one end, on one end of how all these things fit together, and then we have dark military applications and government applications that we'll never see. We see the commercialization of them 20 years later, but even that cycle is getting short cycled. So the whole idea, the fundamental tenets of AI, and understanding that first AI should do no harm, and secondly not have the biases or the ability to train itself to make its own decisions as opposed to advise on things that it's being prompted about. Those are some of the issues that tie into not only the ethics of AI and the biases and so on, but I think if you also take a look at how it integrates with business and how business leaders are trying to marshal resources. And I heard someone say recently that one of the challenges about AI is being first to do something. Doesn't mean that it's right, doesn't mean that it's ethical, but to be first. and to get the claim that you're the first to do something. And I think that in some ways that has diminished our standing as a species. We've kind of lost.
It's funny. Yeah, it makes me think of kind of news and reporting, which I feel like has kind of gone that same vein of doesn't matter if you're right or you've done due diligence, like, but if you're the first to put out a report, that is kind of what's most important these days, especially just with social media and Twitter, where you can post things within 5 seconds of finding out a piece of information. And hey, if you're the first and you happen to be right, I feel like that's almost more important these days than okay, well, did you have all the facts and all the data and the information? So yeah, again, that's just what it makes me think of your kind of commentary there.
Right. And when you think of, for example, where will we be? There's been all kinds of studies done on how AI is going to affect different careers, different career paths.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I listen to young people talking about what they're going to go to school for or what they're taking in school as a degree. And I'm thinking to myself, man, oh man, if I knew now, or if you knew now what I know now about where the market is and where the technology is, that's not something I'd be investing some time in. You take a look at a couple of quick examples. The legal profession, the accounting profession. I know that we've got a lot of well-placed attorneys, and they're. I'm not trying to pick on them. I'm just saying that it's
Yeah.
part of the nature of how the technology is going to invade and is already invading their environment. So it's great to be making, 400 or 500K a year and driving your expensive car and taking the vacations and so on. But I think that's another profession like accountants who think, well, it's always been this way. It will always continue to be this way. And with, as you know from your experience, with the deep access or the access to deep knowledge, deep data, learning management models. There are all kinds of ways that historical data that's been archived over decades and decades is now available on a whim. And so setting precedents or going back and reviewing cases for attorneys or comparing it to a bylaw or a recent case in the neighborhood, whether it's at the local level or international crime, all of these things are available at a whim's notice. Um, and
Yep.
so, it's more how do you use AI to get where you need to be? And it's the same thing for accountants. They've come up with new changes in legislation and standards. I'll say standards more than legislation with respect to accountants and how external accounting is done. So, for example, a recent change, I believe it was 2021, maybe early 2022, the standards for external accountants was expanded to include software code. Now, what does
Okay.
an accountant know about software? Probably not much. I mean, I'm sure there are some that
Yeah.
straddle both environments,
Mhm.
but most wouldn't. And so there are tools out there to help them understand what the changes have been and how to apply these changes. But again, if we go back to human nature, most people enjoy the status quo. If that's going to
Yes,
cannibalize my
definitely.
revenue or it's going to mean I have to learn or take a week away from billings, maybe not so much. So that complacency, I think, is a real barrier given the fact that AI doesn't care. AI doesn't care if you're going to wait. AI doesn't care if you're going to do it tomorrow. It's full on 24/7, and it's getting the dial spins a little faster every day. It's not just spinning fast.
Yes. No, it's advancing exponentially as opposed to in a linear format. So yeah, it's like hey, where we were, 5 years ago to 2 years ago to
Mm-hmm.
today is just it continues to grow and it's faster and faster and faster. Honestly, I love the fact that you mentioned like hey, yeah, old school kind of businesses and firms and yeah, accounting and legal firms. In that, hey, a lot of them have these old school processes that they're kind of stuck in their way. Maybe they're just, hey, part of an older generation and don't understand, I think, some of the benefits that AI can provide. Not to say that, hey, it's you buy it and it fixes everything or, immediately advances all your processes. I think you need to do it correctly and have the right inputs and data for it. But yeah, it's just the power of it to me can make things so much more efficient for you and optimize really your business that, again, a lot of people, I think, don't recognize yet. And hopefully that changes, in the near future. But you're right. It also comes with accepting the fact that new changes or new processes or technology can actually help, as opposed to remaining in status quo and doing what you've always done because, hey, that's what we've done and it's worked. So kind of accepting that there may be new and better processes to adapt to, again, help yourself. So
and
yeah, no, that's
well,
fantastic.
and Jack, one of the things we
Um,
found is as we take a look at how do we make, for example, AI real for a new prospect, a new client. And one of the things we typically
mhm.
do is we'll ask them for a problem statement. What's an issue that you're currently feeling in your business, and let's take a look at how AI might address that problem, solve it for you, and providing sustaining and scalable value over time. Because agents, of course, these days can be replicated so quickly. It's not like, okay, well, we've got one here, now we need to hire 500 people to do the same thing. You can replicate that same agent so many different times in almost a click of a mouse. Comparatively speaking. So a problem statement is a great way for someone who has maybe some familiarity. They've seen some newsreels, read some articles, seen some videos, but aren't quite sure how it really would help them in their business. A problem statement is a wonderful way to kind of tease out some of the issues that they're facing and at the same time clarify the problem and show them where AI can really help. And we've done that, again, in a variety of different verticals, manufacturing, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yeah, I was curious if you had any specific examples that you'd be willing to share of how acquired acquisitions has actually helped or like a real life business.
oh, we have a couple for sure. Let me think.
Yeah, I would hope so. But yeah, if there's any that come to mind, yeah, would love to just hear about
There's
it.
there's one that Tracy and I refer to from time to time because it has not only a very practical side to it, but it really strikes an emotional chord. And what I'll say about that is this: we had through different relationships that Tracy's had in business, she knew this physician in the southwestern U.S. and that allowed us to have a call with him and find out what his pressure points were and where he was trying to get relief and so on. And we learned fairly quickly on an initial call with him. First of all, he runs a cancer clinic, and that cancer clinic primarily addresses children who have a very particular type of cancer and really have gone through everything Western medicine has to offer, and they're basically on death's doorstep. So it's a very, very emotionally charged situation in the sense that, everyone's affected, everyone's trying to help, but what do we do? Well, this gentleman has had an outstanding success rate in curing these cancers and extending the life and making the quality of life better for many of these children. And one of the things he said is, we've got our processes, everything we do is precision medicine, but it takes a long time. For example, from the time a child shows up on our doorstep, we need 2 weeks to do all of our internal analytics, medical diagnoses, et cetera, et cetera. Then we
Okay.
need 4 weeks to analyze the data that we've gathered. And a lot of that we sit around a table and we're comparing notes based on different tests and different doctors' specialties and so on. Then we take a look at proposing a treatment plan that we think is going to be viable, and then whatever equipment are going to need to assist in the treatment of this child either needs to be ordered or fabricated or somehow acquire it. And bottom
Yeah.
line is that from the day the child walks into the clinic until the day they're actually ready to help that child, it's about 12 weeks.
Yeah, it sounds pretty long of a process, especially when that's
It is.
yeah pretty serious. And you like address it as soon as possible.
Yeah,
So
I mean, given the state of the child's health, 12 weeks is an eternity. So we sat down with him and we worked through processes and how AI could assist and so on. And the short version in all of this is that we were able to take those 12 weeks and compress them into about 4 hours using AI as automated analysis and doing calculations and integrating data, and not just all data, but the right data at the right time based on the problem they were trying to solve. So there are very, very practical real time applications of AI, we as independent analysts, we're not wed to any particular technology company. So we come in looking at a holistic solution, and again, whether it's understanding what a transportation company does, an airline does, or a mining company, or it doesn't really matter. I know they're all very different industries, and they're all unique in the way they do things. Um, but the problems they're trying to solve and the application of technology can only really begin when you have an objective assessment. So if it's truly objective, whether it's the change management component, whether it's coders and or a work plan and separating development and testing and production environments, and how do you roll things on properly, how do you roll them off, how do you take a look at comparing two systems and making sure at the end of the day you're getting the same output that you're expecting. It's not all technology, and I guess that was really the point of the example that I just gave you. There are real human implications to the effects of all of this stuff as well. And it could be not only a sick child, it could be job loss. Take a look at the transportation industry. There have been many forecasts out there talking about how many millions of truckers around the world will eventually be displaced because of automated driving vehicles. So I don't want to in any way, shape, or form paint a dystopian future, because I don't think that's what it's about. I think with the right leadership in the right places around the world, we truly do have an opportunity to make sure that people have an opportunity to understand their skills, their competencies, their attitudes, abilities, behaviors, and repurpose those in a way that will allow them to segue, balancing and building off all the successes they've had into something else that's also purposeful for them. I was involved in a project with the U.S. Army probably about 6 or 7 years ago now, and it was the soldier of the future. And we were talking and a lot of discussions and decisions being made about, okay, the technology is great. The U.S. Armed Forces are premier force in the world, and they have access to unlimited technology, and there's all kinds of R&D, etc. But what about the soldier in the uniform? What does that soldier need to have as again, attitudes, behaviors, competency, skills, and knowledge? How do you experience that? How do you train them? How do you push them in the sense of helping them grow with the technology as it keeps unfolding? So those are some of the areas that we've worked in. Every project's unique.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I kind of love that you guys have you come in with kind of an objective approach in that, hey, recognizing every industry is different and everyone has different problems and issues and how they affect, real life and real people, along with, hey, figuring out how do we optimize your business or your environment to make it as efficient as possible. The medical example of, hey, we could do something in 12 weeks or that you do in 12 weeks and we could simplify it into a process to do it in a handful of hours. Like, that to me has infinite cost savings, I'm sure, for them, infinite real life applications for those patients. So yeah, I think there's just a lot of good stuff behind that.
Well, and to put
appreciate you sharing.
To put a bow on that particular example,
mm-hmm.
That particular doctor and clinic were able to treat 20 children a year. But with the processes and everything that were put in place, we're in a situation where, now that doctor can treat basically 200 patients a year. And, treatments are not inexpensive. It's very costly, but they now have benefactors and people donating to actually underwrite the cost of the treatments for these families that can't afford it. So there are lots of good stories out there. The other thing to remember, I think, which many consultants forget, is that organizations have different needs at different times. Okay. So you can be in the same industry as another company or competitor, but your needs as an organization will be different than your competitors because of all the dynamics. And as soon as you throw humans into the mix, it all goes out the window, right?
Gets more complicated, for sure.
Yeah.
I do want to pivot a little bit here since, you brought it up a little bit with existing businesses, but I was curious for acquired acquisitions. what stage really are you guys currently in at the moment, and what does growth look like for you over the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, actually, it's a great question. As much as we have been sticking to the mantra about being agnostic and independent, we were collaborating with a firm that focuses on ERP assessments. Again, their assessments are objective. It's not tied to other vendors or
Mhm.
GSSPs, but just purely from the perspective of optics and explaining that relationship. And even though customers got it once we explained it, we saw that as a potential barrier. So we've divested ourselves from that situation so that we're back to our fundamental roots. And I think from what I'm hearing, the market is really responding to that. So over the next 6 to 12 months for us, given the state of the world, geopolitical events, the implications of the speed of technology, the confusion in the marketplace, leadership looking for basically a truth that they can galvanize around and come back to and reference. Well, this is what we decided. This is the path that we chose. And before we go too far off, let's come back and make sure we understood what it was we were doing. Because if it's not within scope of what we agreed to do, it's a distraction. And distractions take time and money. So I think that that message is really resonating. We're going to make a few changes to our website over the next couple of weeks to reflect that change. But we're very excited simply because, again, with being agnostic and at my age and stage of life, I don't have to really be careful about how I position my words. Obviously, I want to speak with people and customers and everybody with respect,
Mhm.
but I'm not going to be so respectful that the truth gets lost. And I think that's an important ingredient, and I think truly that that's one thing that clients appreciate, that we'll find a way to say it nicely, but we're not going to compromise on the truth. And this is what our analysis shows. If we're wrong, show us what data was not included. How could we maybe approach this from a different perspective to validate again what we've already discovered. What we do is pretty robust, so we don't really have an issue from that perspective. But take a look at the amount of leadership that's changing seats right now in corporate North America. It's like a shell game.
Oh,
It's a shell game. It's
yeah.
spin the wheel. There's a lot of change going on, and so when you have change at the top, and that's affecting how people are following not only the leader but the message and the mantra that they want to
Mhm.
instill, but it's changing weekly or monthly, then it really comes back to values. Because events can change, but your values, if you really know what your values are, they're not going to change. And I think that that's the message our clients are seeing and working us, that the value is there because we're sticking to the truth.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because, again, I felt like just doing a little bit of review on yourself and acquired acquisitions and that. I was like, okay, I'd love to hear more because for me, having no outside perspective and knowledge is like, I think I need to hear, from the horse's mouth how you guys go about explaining this. And I ran into another cybersecurity company and had a conversation with them, and I felt like they're very confident in their product and have the data and analytics to back it up. But I think some of their issues were almost explaining that to their prospective customers, of making sure that they understand exactly what we do, how we do it, and what makes them different. So yeah, just for me, it's interesting that you kind of point that out because I feel like I've seen that in a different industry, and obviously that is very important. You could have the best product in the market, but if people don't understand it or aren't interested or don't see that value pretty quickly, then hey, it may not manifest into them actually making a purchase with you or partnering with you for those services. So yeah, that's great. I did. It kind of led me into my next question, which you covered a little bit. Beyond, hey, kind of maybe the educational or knowledge gap, what do you feel like has been the toughest part of getting your product or service into the hands of your ideal customers?
Oh, well, we touched on that in a big way actually earlier on this call,
Yeah.
and that's the status quo. The real competition is always a status quo. It's breaking that mold. And so, yes, of course, there's Jeffrey Moore and the technology adoption life cycle and the innovators and early adopters and the laggards and all that stuff. It's good. It's good as a kind of a backdrop. that gives you an idea that basically in our business, because we tend to be pushing things out at the edge of the envelope, you're interested in the top 12 to 14% of businesses out there. And when I say top, I don't necessarily mean by revenue. I mean that are anxious and interested in adopting innovation. And so, I find it an interesting discussion, but it's also gotten a bit old and tired when we talk about innovation, especially when I see governments trying to run an innovation program. What do you know about innovation, really? I mean, the governments are set up to process, as they should be, the bulk of people and programs that they can. Now, there are elements of government departments, whether it's Canada, the US, Europe, it doesn't matter where it is, but to see these programs that get fed funds and are led by bureaucrats or career government employees that are just, again, maintaining the status quo. I've got a list and a box to check and a box to check. It doesn't really help the topic or the practical application of innovation. And so for us, that status quo is always our number one competitor.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, honestly. Um, I guess on that note, like, do you have any particular bottlenecks around things as simple as like pipeline outreach, lead conversion? Like, do you feel like those are issues, or is it more, hey, making that final close because people are kind of stuck in their ways?
That, again, a great question. We write copy that really gets a very high open rate. It's not uncommon for us to send out, let's say, an email campaign and have a 42, 43% open rate. Like it's
Wow.
crazy.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's extremely high. That's
yeah, and
fantastic.
I mean we have all the metrics and to show the opens and all the rest of it. So that's something we've done and tracked very tightly. The other thing is that in addition to writing great copy and using those kinds of platforms to get our message out, the other thing is the audience. If you're starting at the bottom trying to push a pebble uphill, it's very difficult. But if you start as high as you can possibly go, and for us that's the board and the C-suite. So when we start at that level and send out a message to everyone in that organization that's maybe it's the chair of the internal audit committee on the board, for example. Maybe it is one of the technology experts on the board, or maybe it's the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. Um, those are the people that are interested in what we do, and they're going to be our sponsors to push the message down. And we find it
Internal champion.
exactly. We find that it's far more successful that way. So it depends on what your product and service are. Not all products and services need to go to the board, but considering what we do and how sensitive everything we do is, because everything we do is confidential. We don't mess around. Um, and having worked in classified military environments, we take all of that very, very seriously. So our intention is always to go to the board and the C-suite first. And with great copy and a good platform to get that message out and something that measures everything on the back end, we can validate, the efficacy of what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it is so important to actually have the buy-in from those decision makers from the top down. But at the same time, you're right. You probably do need an internal champion and somebody to push, because it's like, hey, you're not actually working for that company. You don't have a seat, in the internal meetings that they're talking about it. So yeah, having that internal champion to really push for it, I think, is always kind of fantastic and a good first step that you need to build that relationship, and again, hopefully secure a partnership there. So yeah, that is great. I do have a couple more questions here. I know we're getting to be at time, and I want to be conscious of your time. But do you have any like top priorities for you guys this quarter? Like, what is top of mind for you guys?
Well, we've been looking at industry segmentation. That's something for us that I think we want to build on. Um, depending on who you talk to, some companies, big five firms, etc., will organize the marketplace into 15 verticals, 15 industries, 21 industries. We don't care what the number is. We have our own way of approaching it. Um, But having said that, if you take a look at exposure and vulnerability in the marketplace, so for example, um, sensitivity of information would suggest that healthcare could be an area with all of the legislation around privacy, et cetera, et cetera. On the one hand, we could look at that and say, well, that's really a viable opportunity to continue building in. On the other, do we have the desire to get involved in every period and comma that changes in all of that legislation, or would we be better to pursue another industry? So in this particular
Mhm.
example, I'm taking a look at, for example, airlines. Airlines, as you know, we've had some kerfuffles in the airline industry in Canada over the last, since like say June and before, and that gets down to people and negotiations, and there are things that become complicated because it's political and it's union and it's people's lives and workforce and passenger safety, and it's complex. But that's an area that I think, for example, automated scheduling. When you have 1,500 flights a day, for example, and they're international destinations, and how so one of your crew decides to back out, they're sick, they physically can't work the flight. Well, a lot of that isn't automated anywhere near the way it should be automated. You take a look at transportation industry and supply chain. You take a look at telematics. In a railway car or a truck, they have to have sensors, for example, if you're transporting food, on making sure the temperature, the refrigeration is working. That's only one example. There could be 1,500 or 1,000 or 800 or 500 data points that are being produced by that truck or that train car. So how do you integrate that in a way that allows the overseers of that system make it make sense? And again,
Gotcha. Yeah, I think I was just going to say, I feel like from the data perspective, it's like, hey, I think more data is always better, at least to me, but it also has to make sense. And you can't just say, hey, here's, like you said, 1,000 data points. Like, well, what are we doing with that? So to actually kind of optimize that data and figure out, okay, how can it make our people, our processes, our business work more efficiently? I think that is the kind of important.
absolutely. And Jack, when you take a look at how many companies, organizations, government or private sector, they don't throw any data away often. They don't drive to what we
Mm-hmm.
call a clean core. They don't take data that hasn't been used in 20 years and archive it, somewhere. They keep it in the system, keep it live. So you've got increased management costs, you've got increased maintenance costs, you've got extra licensing you're paying for that you may not need to pay for. So there are just a ton of different perspectives, and Tracy and I are pretty good. We've been working together for quite a while, and while we bring two very, very different experiences in consulting and technology and business, um, we complement each other very well. And that allows us really to come in and offer a very broad, but where it needs to be, the drill down in the areas where the customer may need some advice, and appreciates the fact that we're being so truthful. We're honorable in the way we deliver that information. And I think that, again, respect, truth they've been lost in so many businesses. So,
I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and I was like, "Hey, from my perspective, like, I'll be honest and transparent with you, especially hey, being kind of a new business owner. That if there's something I can do for you, fantastic. If there's not, or there's limitations, then I'll let you know. I'm not going to beat around the bush or tell you I can do something when I just couldn't deliver on it. And I think that's important to establishing a relationship and working with somebody that you feel comfortable with. So yeah, again, just appreciate that perspective and yeah, your guys' value.
when you originally contacted, sorry, go ahead. When you originally contacted me when we were talking about getting together and having this chat, one of the things we talked about is, the topic of hiring experts, and how do
Mm-hmm.
customers, identify experts. You know, uh, I don't want to poo-poo anything, but at the same time, there are a lot of dirty secrets in the consulting industry. And I know there are a lot of experienced clients of customer services, and I've seen from both a recipient of and a seller and provider of those services, these death marches that go on in these organizations implementing these large projects. And there's a way to address that, but it usually all comes down to, I said earlier on this call that, about 87% of ERP implementations are deemed to be either an abject failure or a partial failure. And if you don't start with objective assessment data, and that can be from just your change management program. It doesn't have to be down in the bits and bytes. It can be sponsorship. It can be some very untechnical things. But if you don't have a good appreciation for how it all fits together, customers run the risk of regret spending, having to do throwaway work, reinvesting.
Yeah, waste of money, waste of time, waste of resources.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's like, how can I either make more money for the business or save money to optimize things? So, yeah, it's a tough question. I think a lot of people, again, kind of stuck in their ways, so they don't want to think about those things, but they're obviously, very important.
And just one last thing. I was sitting on a plane recently talking to a well-placed person in a Big Five firm. And we struck up a conversation because they had their laptop open, and always was turned not quite to just facing her, but she was typing things and talking a little bit to herself about a bunch of things. And so I said, "Excuse me, what do you do?" And she said, "Well, I'm a blah 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 in ABC firm." And I said, "That's interesting." I said, I told her who I had worked for in the past and my experience in Wall Street and so on. And she was working on a presentation, but interestingly enough, and I won't get into all the details, but the presentation she was working on, which she was going to be showing to a client, she was on flight and destination to meet this client, was actually generated by AI.
Interesting.
So take a look at the Big Five firms, and I'm not saying they're all the same and they're trying to take advantage of clients. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that no matter what you do, whether you drive a truck or whether you're a CEO or on a board, AI is so accessible and can, if not used properly, can be either used to misrepresent something, or it can be portrayed as the solution. And it's important to sort of take a big step back and look at it with objective eyes, again, agnostically. Does it just smell right? Does this make any sense at all? And people are so quick to dive in and just assume all kinds of things incorrectly. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time to look at it objectively. It's not like it takes weeks or months. It can be done usually very quickly. But does it pass the sniff test? And a lot of times it doesn't, but people are just so caught up that they don't take the time to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I know we're, again, getting to time here, so I have one last question. I'll ask you if, keep it brief. But hypothetically, and I like to ask this to a lot of people, but if you had a magic wand right now where you could fix one thing in your business for acquired acquisitions that's either holding you back or slowing you down to get where you want to be, what would that thing be for you?
I guess for acquired insights, what we would like to be able to qualify opportunities faster. I mentioned to you that the problem statement is always helpful. It helps a customer focus on something real. That's one aspect of qualifying an opportunity, but we can't necessarily look into the politics of the organization. We can't look into, at least not at first blush. We get familiar with some of those things as we work with a customer. But if there was a way that we had that magic wand and we could understand what those things were, it would probably make work for everybody just a little bit easier, faster, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. If we all have that magic wand, I think things would be a little bit easier. That's not reality sometimes. All good, but that's pretty much all I had for you. I very much appreciate the time. I guess very quickly, if people wanted to learn more about Acquired Insights or get in touch with your team, where could they do that? And obviously, I'll happily put a link in the podcast chat here, but anything you want to share in terms of how to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jack. Can reach us at www.ainc.cloud, AIincorporated.cloud, AIinc.cloud. And then we've got a toll-free number, Canada, US, 1-800-627-1010. 4151. Leave a quick message. We get back to people fairly quickly, and we can give a direct call and find out if there's an opportunity for us to come in and give some assistance. Those are probably the two best ways. Now, note again, we're going to be making some changes to the website over the next probably a couple of weeks. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there. Use cases and points of view. Also checked in our LinkedIn profiles. I'm Gary L. Melling on LinkedIn, and Tracy Fieber, TracyFieber. So there are lots of ways
Perfect.
that people can do some outreach if they're so inclined.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And that is, fantastic. I think you already shared a ton of good information that hopefully gets people intrigued.